Hello, hello. How is everyone? Are we ready for today? Are we ready for some Lord of the Rings? I certainly am. For sure, for sure. Hope everyone's been having a good day. I'm gonna take my water sippies. Mandatory water sippies. Let me go ahead. I can turn that off for now, because since we haven't started. I'm eating black-eyed peas right now, and I want to die. Why the fuck are you eating black-eyed peas? Let me adjust my microphone. It just seems like a you issue, really. I mean, you chose to eat it. I mean, why would you do that? Superstition? What? What is the superstition regarding black-eyed? It's a luck thing, okay? Never ever heard of that before, but sure. Hello, Marshall. I'm doing pretty good. Today's a... good God. Scared the shit out of me. Hello, monkey. Thank you for the follow. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please, 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 I hope you enjoy yourself. Let me, fix myself too. There we go. Very nice. But yeah, I've been having a pretty good day. I had a very responsible New Year's. I hope everyone else did as well. Happy, wonderful New Year, everyone. It's really hard to kind of like say Happy New Year's because especially when you have people who are in different time zones than you, you're kind of like saying Happy New Year's if they're like ahead of you, and then you kind of have to say it like when it's yours, and then if they're behind you, you know, it's a bit of a weird thing. Another reason why I like absolutely hate time zones, but we can wait. We can wait to rant about time zones for another stream. I have thoughts about time zones, let me tell you. Eating black-eyed peas brings good fortune into the new year. Oh, because it's like a southern thing. Oh, interesting. Okay. It's also a very literal interpretation of Courage Wolf meme. Never heard of that before, but good to know. I should have eaten peas then. Damn. Hey, I've been following your YouTube for a bit. Wanted to say thank you for making my life better with your audios. I wish you the best day possible. Thank you so much. I hope you have a blessed new year. Good vibes only. You will only succeed. Only succeed. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Happy New Year and all the best before I stop talking and enjoy the reading. Don't worry, don't worry. We're talking now. We're talking now. We can enjoy the little banters before we start, all right? I promised we could talk a little bit before we start, all right? Swallow failure, shit success. That honestly, how do I feel about that? That's honestly not a bad saying. I thought you were gonna, I thought you meant something else for a second when you said swallow, but I think I'm just I think I'm just a little corrupted like that, but we're gonna swallow our failure and we're gonna shit out success. So much shitting. Today's gonna be a really shittily successful year. Only way you could put it. The best way you could put it, of course. But I hope you all celebrated in some ways in your own way, even if it's like you just, you know, went to sleep. I've definitely kind of ignored one New Year and I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go to bed. It's any normal day except the calendar year changes, so I didn't really bother too much with it. But last night I personally was enjoying my time driving throughout Europe on my Euro Truck Simulator that I got for Christmas, which was great. I had a wonderful peaceful time on one of like the more peaceful New Year's I've had like non-existent ones where I just like didn't celebrate. I've had very chaotic ones, and that's of course when I'm like celebrating it, you know. And then there were just kind of like last night where it was just really nice. I honestly didn't even know that it was like past New Year's. It was like almost like an hour. I think it was like 12:30, 12:45 or something, and I was like, oh shit, it's New Year. It's past midnight, fuck. Because normally I have like a timer to kind of keep myself on, and like if you were with me last New Year's, we were actually playing Genshin while we were while we were waiting for midnight to hit. I don't remember. I was trying to remember what we did for like what we were doing in Genshin, and for the life of me I do not know. I just know we were playing Genshin. I stopped for a bit. We said Happy New Year's. I think I said like some resolutions. I don't remember if I did or not, but and then we just went back to Genshin. Yeah, I don't know if that's a better New Year's than last night, but it was something. As you read Lord of the Rings, I'm busy. I'm gonna finish the rest of Shadow the Hedgehog endings. Currently working on the 7 out of 11. I read that as like the store 7-11, which I think I think they're getting rid of them. They are not as common anymore. I think they're just being replaced by gas stations, and it's so unfortunate because how else am I supposed to get a free Slurpee on the like one day out of the calendar year, you know? I want my free fucking Slurpee. And they're like gone. They're all gone. That, or I just don't trust the quality of like the cleanliness of it. Not quality, the cleanliness. It's a little sketchy. A little sketch. All right. How about we get started? How does that sound? Are we okay with that? Let me go ahead. Let me loosen this up. There we go. Just like that. Is it now a gas station? Oh, I know it's like a... Oh, my mic. Well, I know it's like a convenience store, but there's never like gas, like, you know, to like get gas. It's just been like a convenience store. You know, like that's it. That's all it's been. Is a convenience store. So, hello, Natalie. Nice to see you again. Hope you've been doing good. Happy New Year. Circle K in Orlando is surprisingly a high end. Really? I mean, Circle K isn't bad. Circle K and Quick Trip to me are kind of the same. I often get them very confused whenever I like go to one. I'll be like, yeah, it was just a Quick Trip. It's like, no, that was a Circle K. I don't know why. I cannot. My brain cannot for some reason. I don't know what it is. But I learned that Casey's is actually really fucking nice, and their food is good. It started spreading around in my area a bit. So I just like, you know, over the last few years, I've been going to Casey's more and more, and Casey's is like surprisingly good. I don't know what it is. But I'm happy about that, not gonna lie. We gotta get rid of them BPs and Shell gas stations and replace them with Casey's. Though Casey's is expensive, but what like gas station food isn't, you know? Happy New Year to you as well. I hope you're doing good. I am. Yes, thank you so much for asking. Yes, I am. I'm going through our book right now just to see where we left off. Alright, so I know you went over the little song. We can go back a bit. Okay, I think I found where we left off. So, for those who were not here last time we started, I just hit my book against my guess. I'm sorry. So those if you weren't here last time, we started Fellowship of the Ring. We are almost done with chapter 1. We're gonna get through chapter 2 and maybe chapter 3. I don't know. We'll see. We went through the prologue. We got some backstory, some world building regarding, you know, how the world's looking and the history about hobbits. And then we've also gone through in chapter 1 the goodbye party to Bilbo. We're saying goodbye. He's dipping out. He's like, fuck this shit. I'm leaving. I'm gonna go hang out with the elves. So then our story with Frodo is about to start. All right, so we're gonna get started. Like I said, I have like a little message that should be running. If it works. There we go. Oh, you know what I should do? Let me fix it really quick. Okay, that's gonna be better. Alright, so since the reading has started, that's kind of like a little reminder. I'm not purposely ignoring your messages. I will read them afterwards, but I don't want to like interrupt the reading. So I'm not mad at you. I don't hate you. Just for the sake of reading a book, I'm not gonna answer any messages, but I will afterwards. All right. So with that, we will begin. I'm gonna go ahead and read the previous paragraph, and then I will get started, all right? He paused, silent for a moment. Then without another word, he turned away from the lights and voices in the fields and tents, and followed by his 3 companions, went round into his garden, and trotted down the long sloping path. He jumped over a low place in the hedge at the bottom, and took to the meadows, passing into the night like a rustle of wind in the grass. Gandalf remained for a while, staring after him into the darkness. "Goodbye, my dear Bilbo, until our next meeting," he said softly, and went back indoors. Frodo came and soon afterwards, and he found himself sitting in the dark, deep in thought. "Has he gone?" he asked. "Yes," answered Gandalf. "He has gone at last." I hoped, until this evening, that it was only a joke," said Frodo, "but I knew in my heart that he really meant to go. He always used to joke about serious things. I wish I had come back sooner, just to see him off." "I really think he preferred slipping off quietly in the end," said Gandalf. "Don't be too troubled. He'll be all right, now. He left a packet for you. There it is." Frodo took the envelope from the mantelpiece and glanced at it, but did not open it. "You'll find his will and all the other documents in there, I think," said the wizard. "You are the master of Bag End now, and also, I fancy, you'll find a golden ring." "The ring!" exclaimed Frodo. "Has he left that? I wonder why. Still, it may be useful." It may not," said Gandalf. "I should not make use of it if I were you, but keep it secret and keep it safe. Now I am going to bed." As master of Bag End, Frodo felt it his painful duty to say goodbye to the guests. Rumors of strange events had by now spread all over the field, but Frodo would only say, "No doubt everything will be cleared up in the morning." About midnight, carriages came for the important folk. One by one, they rolled away, One by one, they rolled away, filled with full but very unsatisfied hobbits. Gardeners came by arraignment and removed in wheelbarrows those that had inadvertently remained behind. Night slowly passed. The sun rose. The hobbits rose rather later, Morning went on, people came and began, by orders, to clear away the pavilions and the tables and the chairs, and the spoons and knives and bottles and plates, and the lanterns, and the flowering shrubs and boxes, and the crumbs and cracker paper, and the forgotten bags and gloves and handkerchiefs, and the uneaten food, a very small item. Then a number of other people came, without orders, Bagginses and Boffins and Bulgars and Tooks, and the other guests that lived or were staying near. By midday, even when the best fed were out and about again, there was a large crowd at Bag End, uninvited, but not unexpected. Frodo was waiting on the step, smiling, but looked rather tired and worried. He welcomed all the callers, but he had not much more to say than before. His reply to all inquiries was simply this: Mr. Bilbo Baggins has gone away, as far as I know, for good. Some of the visitors he invited to come inside, as Bilbo had left messages for them. Inside in the hall, there was a piled large assortment of packages and parcels and small articles of furniture. On every item, there was a label tied. There were several labels of the sort. For Aladar took, for his very own, from Bilbo. On an umbrella, Aladar had carried off many unlabeled ones. For Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence with love from Bilbo. On a large waste paper basket, Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 99 and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. For Milo Burrows, hoping it will be useful, from Bibi, on a gold pen and ink bottle. Milo never answered letters. For Angelica's use, from Uncle Bilbo, on a round convex mirror. She was a young Baggins, and too obviously considered her face shapely. For the collection of Hugo Bracegirdle, on a contributor. On an empty bookcase, Hugo was a great borrower of books, and worse than usual at returning them. For Lobelia Sackville Baggins, as a present. On a case of silver spoons, Bilbo believed that she acquired good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. Lobelia knew that quite well. When she arrived later in the day, she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons. This was only a small selection of the assembled presents. Bilbo's residence had gotten rather cluttered up with things in the course of his long life. It was a tendency of hobbit holes to get cluttered up, for which the custom of giving so many birthday presents was largely responsible. Not, of course, that the birthday presents were always new. There were 1 or 2 old mathams of forgotten uses that had circulated all around the district. But Bilbo had usually given new presents, and kept those that he received. The old hole was now being cleared a little. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point or some joke, but, of course, most of the things were given where they would be wanted and welcomed. The poor hobbits, and especially those of Backshot Row, did very well. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. Old Rory Bandybuck, in his return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of Old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle. There was plenty of everything left for Frodo, and of course all the chief treasures, as well as the books, pictures, and more than enough furniture that were left in his possession. There was, however, no sign nor mention of money or jewelry. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumor that the whole household was being distributed free spread like wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there, but could not be kept out. Labels got torn off and mixed, and quarrels broke out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hall. Others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them, or with anything that seemed unwanted or unwatched. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. In the middle of the commotion, the Sackville Bagginses arrived. Frodo had retired for a while and left his friend Merry Brandybuck to keep an eye on things. When Otho loudly demanded to see Frodo, Merry bowed politely. "He is indisposed," he said. "He is resting." "Hiding, you mean," said Lobelia. "Anyway, we wanted to see him, and we mean to see him. Just go and tell him so." Merry left them a long while in the hall, and they had time to discover their parting gift of spoons. It did not improve their tempers. Eventually, they were shown to the study. Frodo was sitting at a table with a lot of papers in front of him. He looked indisposed to see Sackville Bagginses at any rate, and he stood up, fidgeting with something in his pocket, but he spoke quite politely. The Sackville Bagginses were rather offensive. They began by offering him bad bargain prices, as between friends, for various valuable and unlabeled things. When Frodo replied that the only things specially directed by Bilbo were being given away, they said the whole affair was very fishy. "Only one thing is clear to me," said Otho, "and that is that you are doing exceedingly well out of it. I insist on seeing the will." Otho would have been Bilbo's heir, but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was, unfortunately, very clear and correct, according to the legal customs of hobbits, which demand, among other things, seeing 7 signatures of witnesses in red ink. "Foiled again," he said to his wife, "and after waiting 60 years. Spoons? Fiddlesticks." He snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and stumped off. But Lobelia was not so easily got rid of. A little later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on, and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners and tapping the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises, after he had relieved her of several small but rather valuable articles that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. Her face looked as if she was in the throes of thinking out a really crushing parting remark, but all she found to say, turning around on the step, was, "You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why didn't you go too? You don't belong here. You are no Baggins. You're a Brandybuck." "Didn't you hear that, Merry? That was an insult, if you like," said Frodo as he shut the door on her. "It was a compliment," said Merry Brandybuck, "and so, of course, not true." Then they went around the hole and evicted 3 young hobbits, 2 boffins, and a bolger, who were knocking holes on the walls of one of the cellars. Frodo had also had a tussle with a young Sancho Proudfoot, old Odo Proudfoot's grandson, who had begun an excavation of the larger pantry, where he thought there was an echo. The legend of Bilbo's gold excited both curiosity and hope, for legendary gold, mysteriously obtained, if not positively ill-gotten, is, as everyone knows, and anyone's finding, unless the search is interrupted. When he had overcome Sancho and pushed him out, Frodo collapsed on the chair in a hall. "It is time to close the shop, Merry," he said. "Lock the door, and don't open it to anyone today, not even if they bring a battering ram." Then he went to revive himself with a belated cup of tea. He had hardly sat down when there came a soft knock at the front door. Lobelia again, most likely, he thought. She must have thought of something really nasty and have come back again to say it. It can wait. He went on with his tea, and the knock repeated, much louder, but he took no notice. Suddenly, the wizard's head appeared at the window. "If you don't let me in, Frodo, I shall blow your door right down your hole and out through the hill," he said. "My dear Gandalf, half a minute," cried Frodo, running out of the room to the door. Come in. I thought it was Lobelia. Then I forgive you. But I saw her some time ago driving a pony trap towards Bywater with a face that would have curdled new milk. She had already nearly curdled me, and honestly, I nearly tried on Bilbo's ring. I longed to disappear. Don't do that, said Gandalf, sitting down. Do be careful of that ring, Frodo. In fact, it is partly about that I have come to say a last word. Well, what about it? What do you know already? Only what Bilbo told me. I have heard of his story, how he found it, how he used it, on his journey, I mean. Which story, I wonder, said Gandalf. Oh, not what he told the dwarves and put on his book, said Frodo. He told me the true story soon after I came to live here. He said you had pestered him till he told you, so I had better know too. No secrets between us, Frodo, he said, but they are not to go further. It's mine, anyway. That's interesting, said Gandalf. Well, what do you think of it all? If you mean inventing all about a present, well, I thought the true story much more likely, and I couldn't see the point of altering it at all. It was very unlike Bilbo to do so. Anyway, and I thought it was rather odd. So did I, but odd things may happen to people that have such treasures, if they use them. Let it be a warning to you to be very careful with it. It may have other powers than just making you vanish when you wish to. I don't understand, said Frodo. Neither do I, answered the wizard. I have merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. No need to worry. But if you take my advice, you will use it very seldom, or not at all. At least I beg you not to use it in any way that will cause talk or rouse suspicion. I say again, keep it safe, and keep it secret. You are very mysterious. What are you afraid of? I am not certain, so I will say no more. I may be able to tell you something when I come back. I'm going off at once, so this is goodbye for the present. He got up. At once, cried Frodo. Why, I thought you were staying for at least a week. I was looking forward to your help. I didn't mean to, but I have to change my mind. I may be away for a good while, but I will come and see you again, as soon as I can. Expect me when you see me. I shall slip in quietly. I shan't often be visiting the Shire openly again. I find that I have become rather unpopular. They say I am a nuisance and a disturber of the peace. Some people are actually accusing me of spiriting Bilbo away, or worse. If you want to know, there is supposed to be a plot between you and me to get a hold of his wealth. Some people, exclaimed Frodo. You mean Otho and Lobelia? How abominable. I would give them Bag End and everything else if I could get Bilbo back and go off tramping in the country with him. I love the Shire, but I begin to wish, somehow, that I had gone too. I wonder if I shall ever see him again. So do I, said Gandalf. And I wonder many other things. Goodbye now. Take care of yourself. Look out for me, especially at unlikely times. Goodbye. Frodo saw him to the door. He gave him a final wave of his hand and walked off at a surprising pace, but Frodo thought the old wizard looked unusually bent, almost as if he was carrying a great weight. The evening was closing in, and his cloaked figure quickly vanished into the twilight. Frodo did not see him again for a long time. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Past. The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton, and indeed all over the Shire, for a year and a day, and remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits, and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favorite character of legend and lived on long after all the true events were forgotten. But in the meantime, the general opinion of the neighborhood was that Bilbo, who had always rather been cracked, had at last gone quite mad and had run off into the blue. He had undoubtedly fallen to a pool or a river and had come to a tragic but hardly an untimely end. The blame was mostly laid on Gandalf. If only that dreaded wizard will leave young Frodo alone, perhaps he'll settle down and grow some hobbit sense, they said. And to all the appearance, the wizard did leave Frodo alone. and he did settle down, but the growth of the hobbit sense was not very noticeable. Indeed, at once he began to carry on Bilbo's reputation for oddity. He refused to go into mourning, and the next year he gave a party in Bilbo's 112th birthday, which he called the 100-weight feast. But that was short of the mark, for 20 guests were invited, and there were several meals, at which it snowed food and rained drink, as hobbits say. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's birthday party year after year until they got used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead. When they asked where he is then, he shrugged his shoulders. He lived alone, as Bilbo had done, but he had a good many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who had children, been fond of Bilbo, and often in and out of Bag End. Folko Boffin and Fredgar Bolger were two of these, but his closest friends were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. Frodo went on tramping all over the Shire with them, but more often he wandered by himself, and to the amazement of sensible folk, he was sometimes seen far from home, walking in the hills and woods under starlight. Merry and Pippin suspected that he visited the elves at times, as Bilbo had done. As time went on, people began to notice that Frodo also showed signs of good preservation. Outwardly, he retained the appearance of a robust and energetic hobbit just out on his tweens. Some folk have all the luck, they said, but it was not until Frodo approached the usually more sober age of 50 that they began to think it queer. Frodo himself, after the first shock, found that being his own master and the Mr. Baggins of Bag End was rather pleasant. For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future, but half known to himself, the regret that he had not gone with Bilbo was steadily growing. He found himself wondering at times, especially in the autumn, about the wildlands, and strange visions of the mountains he had never seen came into his dreams. He began to say to himself, "Perhaps I shall cross the river myself one day," to which the other half of his mind always replied, "Not yet." So it went on, until his 40s were running out and his 50th birthday was drawing near. 50 was a number that he felt somehow significant or ominous. It was at any rate that age that adventure had suddenly befallen Bilbo. Frodo began to feel restless, and the old paths seemed well too trodden. He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders. He took to wandering further afield and more often by himself. Merry and his other friends watched him anxiously. Often he was walking and talking with strange wayfarers that began at this time to appear in the Shire. There were rumors of strange things happening in the world outside, and as Gandalf had not at that time appeared or sent any message for several years, Frodo gathered that all the news he could. Elves, who were seldom walked in the Shire, could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening, passing and not returning. But they were leaving Middle-earth, and were no longer concerned with its troubles. There were, however, dwarves on the road in unusual numbers. An ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end at the Grey Havens, and the dwarves had always used it on their way to the mines in the Blue Mountains. They were the hobbits' chief source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarves said that little, and hobbits asked no more. But now Frodo often met strange dwarves of far countries, seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy of the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like a shadow in the background of their long memories, but it was ominous and disquieting. It seems that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council, only to reappear in greater strength in the strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there, the power was spreading far and wide, and far away east and south, there were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all of these. But they had no name. Little of all this, of course, reached the ears of the ordinary hobbits, but even the deafest and most stay-at-home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the borders saw strange things. In conversation in the Green Dragon at Bywater, one evening in the spring of Frodo's 50th year showed that even the most comfortable heart of Shire rumors had heard, though most hobbits still laughed at them. Sam Gamgee was sitting in one corner near the fire, and opposite of him was Ted Sandyman, the miller's son, and there were various other rustic hobbits listening to their talk. "Queer things you do hear these days, to be sure," said Sam. "Ah," said Ted, "you do, if you listen, but I can hear fireside tales and children's stories at home if I want to." "No doubt you can," retorted Sam, "and dare I say, the more truth in some of them than you reckon. Who invented the stories, anyway? Take dragons, now." "No, thank ye," said Ted. "I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster, but there was no call to believe in them now. There's only one dragon in Bywater, and that's green," he said, getting a general laugh. "All right," said Sam, laughing with the rest. "But what about the trees, men? These giants, as you might call them. They do say that one bigger than a tree was seen up way beyond the North Moors not long back." "Who's they?" "My cousin Hal, for one. He works for Mr. Boffin at Overhill and goes up to the North Farthing for hunting. He saw one." "Says he did, perhaps. Your Hal's always saying he's seen things, and maybe he sees things that ain't there. But this one was as big as an elm tree, and walking 7 yards to his stride, if it was an inch." "Then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm tree in the North Moors." "Then Hal can't have seen one," said Ted, and there was some laughing and clapping. The audience seems to think that Ted had scored a point. "All the same," said Sam, "you can't deny that the others besides our Halfast have seen queer folk crossing the Shire. Crossing it, mind you, there are more that turned the back at the borders. Let me reread that, I'm so sorry. Crossing it, mind you, there are more than are turned back at the borders. The Bounders have never been so busy before. And I've heard tell that the elves are moving west. They do say they are going to the harbors, out away beyond the White Towers." Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old towers beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition that way over there stood the Grey Havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return. "They are sailing over the sea. They are going to the west and leaving us," said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed. "Well, that isn't anything new, if you believe old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail, but I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone in the Shire." "Well, I don't know," Sam said thoughtfully. He believed that he had seen an elf in the woods, and still hoped to see more one day. Of all the legends that he had heard in his early years, such fragments of tales and half-remembered stories about the elves as the hobbits knew had always moved him most deeply. There are some, even in these parts, as know the fair folk and get news of them, he said. "They're Mr. Baggins now, that I work for. He told me that they were sailing, and he knows a bit about elves. And old Mr. Bilbo knew more. Many's the talk I had with him when I was a little lad." Oh, they were both cracked, said Ted. Leastways, old Bilbo was cracked, and Frodo's cracking. If that's where you get your news from, you'll never want for moonshine. Well, friends, I'm off home. Your good health. He drained his mug and went out noisily. Sam sat silent, and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do in Bag End Garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow, if the weather cleared. The grass was growing fast, but Sam had more on his mind than gardening. After a while, he sighed, got up, and went out. It was early April, and the sky was now clearing for a heavy rain. The sun was down, and a cool, pale evening was quietly fading into the night. He walked home under the early stars, through the Hobbiton and up the hill, whistling softly and thoughtfully. It was just at this time that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. For 3 years after the party, he had been away. Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, and after taking a good look at him, he went off again. During the next year or two, he had turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, and seemed chiefly interested in small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then, suddenly, his visits had ceased. It was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return, and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam was walking home, and the twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with a surprise and a great delight. They looked hard at one another. "Ah, well, eh?" said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." "So do you," Frodo replied, but secretly he had thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were in deep talk, and they stayed up far into the night. The next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was on the hearth, but the sun was warm and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh, and the new green of spring was shimmering in the fields and on the tips of the trees' fingers. Gandalf was thinking of a spring, nearly 80 years before, when Bilbo had run out of Bag End without a handkerchief. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been, and his beard and eyebrows were perhaps longer, and his face was more lined with care and wisdom, but his eyes were as bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigor and delight. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of the morning, he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought. At last, he broke the silence. "Last night, you began to tell me of strange things about my ring, Gandalf," he said. "And then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I guess. In what way?" "In many ways," answered the wizard. "It is far more powerful than I had ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. In Aragon, long ago, many elven rings were made. Magic rings, as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before I was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still, to my mind, dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, one who keeps one of the great rings, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is a weariness, and if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yet, sooner or later, later, if he was strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour him. How terrifying, said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sound of Sam Gamgee cutting the lawn came in from the garden. How long have you known this? Asked Frodo at length. And how much did Bilbo know? Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure, said Gandalf. He certainly never have passed on to you anything that he thought would be a danger. Even though I had promised to look after you, he thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful at need. And if anything was wrong or queer, it was himself. He said that it was growing on his mind, and he always worried about it, but he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame. He thought he had found out that the thing needed looking after. It did not seem always the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way, and it might suddenly slip off a finger where it had been tight. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo, so I've always kept it on its chain. Very wise, said Gandalf. But as long as for his life, Bilbo never connected it with a ring at all. He took all the credit to that himself, and he was very proud of it. Though he was getting restless and uneasy. Thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control. How long have you known this? Said Frodo again. Known, said Gandalf. I had known much that only the wise know, Frodo. But if you mean known about this ring, well, I still do not know, one might say. There's a last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in memory. Let me see. It was in the year that the White Council drove the dark power from Mirkwood, just before the Battle of the Five Armies, that Bilbo found his ring. A shadow fell on my heart then, though I did not know yet what I feared. I'd wondered often how Gollum came by a great ring, as plainly it was, that at least was clear from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had won it, and I could not believe it. When I at last had got the truth out of him, I saw at once he had been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt, much like Gollum with his birthday present. The lies were too much alike for my comfort. Clearly the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on its keeper at once. That was the first real warning that I had, all not too well. I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it, and soon got angry. There was little else I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back. Who is he? Asked Frodo. I've never heard of him before. Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are, or were, no concern of his. Yet he is great among the wise. He's the chief of my order and the head of the council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the Elven rings, great and small, is his province. He had long studied it, seeking out the lost secrets of their making, but when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of his ring lore told against my fears, so my doubt slept uneasily. Still, I watched, and I waited. And all seemed well with Bilbo. And the years passed, yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadow fell on me again, but I said to myself, after all he comes of a long-lived family on his mother's side, there is time yet. Wait. And I waited, until the night when he left his house. He said he did things that filled me with fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. There wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo anxiously. He would get it in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean. He felt better at once, said Gandalf, but there was one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects, and as far as I know, there is no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise, I am the one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge but full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as tough as an old tree root. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise, I would believe. I don't think you need to worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take longer while for the influence to wear off, before it was safe for him to use it again, for instance. Otherwise, he might live on for years, quite happily. Just stop, as he was when he parted with it, for he gave it up in the end of his own accord, an important point. No. I was not troubled about dear Bilbo anymore, once he had let the thing go. It is for you that I feel responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you, and about all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the dark power overcame the Shire, if all of your kind, jolly, stupid Bolgers, Hornblowers, Boffins, Brace Girdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why should we be? He asked, and why should he want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hitherto, mark you, he had entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. You should be thankful, but your safety has passed. He does not need you. He has many more useful servants, but he won't forget you again. And hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Revenge, said Frodo. Revenge for what? I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself and our ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You do not know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself when I was last here, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. Frodo took it from his breeches pocket, where it was clasped to a chain that hung from his belt. He unfastened it and handed it slowly to the wizard. He felt suddenly very heavy, as if it either or Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf had it up. It looked made of pure, solid gold. Can you see any markings on it? He asked. No, said Frodo, there are none. It's quite plain, and it never showed a scratch or a sign of wear. Well then, look. To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back. Wait, he said in commanding voice, giving Frodo a quick look from under the bristling brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew the curtains. The room became dark and silent through the clack of Sham's shears. Now, near to the windows, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood, looking at the fire. Then he stooped and removed the ring to the hearth with tongs, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped. It is quite cool, said Gandalf. Take it. Frodo received it on his shrinking palm, and it seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. Hold it up, said Gandalf, and look closely. As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside. Lines of fire that seemed to have formed the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. I cannot read the fiery letters, said Frodo, in a quavering voice. No, said Gandalf, but I can. The letters are elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But in the common tongue is what it said, close enough. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all in, and in the darkness bid them. It is only 2 lines of a verse long known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkest bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he had lost so many ages ago, and to the great weakening of his power, he greatly desires it. But he must not get it." Frodo sat silently and motionless. He seemed to stretch out in a fast hand like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered. How on earth did it come to me?" "Ah," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story. The beginnings are back in the Black Years, which only lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting when spring had passed to winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord, and the rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again, and left his hold in Mirkwood, and returned to his ancient vastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. I wish it need not to have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf. "And so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. We all have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if we are not for this dreadful chance. The enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break off the last defenses, and cover the lands in a second darkness. He lacks the One Ring. The 3, fairest of all, the elf lords hid from him, and his hand never touched them or sullied them. 7, the dwarf kings possesses, but 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to the mortal men, proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the One, and they became the ring-wraiths, shadows under his great shadow, and the most terrible servants. Long ago, it was many a year since the 9 had walked abroad, yet who knows? As the shadow grows once more, they too may walk again. But come, we will not speak of such things even in the morning of the Shire. So it is now, the 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hidden still, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the 1. For he made that ring himself, and it is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they be, even the 3, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed the one had perished, that the elves had destroyed it, as should have been done, but he knows now that it has not perished, and it has been found, so he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it. It is his great hope, and our great fear. Why? Why wasn't it destroyed? Cried Frodo. And how did the enemy ever come to lose it if he was so strong and it was so precious to him? He clutched the ring in his hand, as if he saw already dark fingers stretching out to seize it. It was taken from him, said Gandalf. The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of the Westernese came to their aid. That is a chapter of ancient history which it might be good to recall for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valor and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps, I will tell you the tale, or you shall hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know how things came to you, and that tale will be tale enough, and this all that I will say. This with Gil-galad, Elven king and Elendil of Westernese, who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed. And Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and the spirit fled and was hidden for long years, until the shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost, and it fell into the great river Anduin and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields was his waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all of his folk were slain. He leapt into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. Gandalf paused. And there were the dark pools amid the Gladden fields, he said. The ring passed out of knowledge and legend, and even so much of his history is known, now only to a few, and the Council of the Wise could discover no more. But at last I can carry on the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived banks of the great river on the edge of the wilder land, a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the stores, for they loved the river, and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. They were among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of the family, called Smeagol. He was interested in the roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools, he burrowed under trees and growing plants, he tunneled into green mounds, and he ceased to look up at the hilltops, where the leaves on trees or the flowers opening in the air. His head and eyes were downward. He had a friend called Deagle, or similar sort, sharper-eyed but not so quick and strong. On a time, they took a boat and went down to the Gladden fields, where there were great beds of iris and flowering reeds. There, Smeagol got out and went nosing about the banks, but Deagle sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly, a great fish took his hook, and before he knew where he was dragged out and down to the water, to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought he saw something shining in the riverbed, and holding his breath, he grabbed at it. When he came up sputtering, with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, he swam to the bank, and behold, when he washed the mud away, in his hands lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Deagle gloated over the ring, Smeagol came softly up behind. "Give us that, Deagle, my love," said Smeagol over his friend's shoulder. "Why?" said Deagle. "Because it's my birthday, my love, and I wants it," said Smeagol. "I don't care," said Deagle. "I'd given you a present already, more than I could afford. I found this, and I'm going to keep it." "Oh. You are indeed, my love," said Smeagol, and he caught Deagle by the throat and strangled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what happened to Deagle. He was murdered far from his home, and his body was cunningly hidden, but Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. He was very pleased with the discovery, and he concealed it, as he used to find out secrets and put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power, according to his stature. It was not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular, and was shunned, when visible, to all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet. He took to thieving and going, muttering to himself, gurgling at the throat, so far that they called him Gollum, and cursed him, and told him to go far away. And his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family, and turned him out of their hole. He wandered in the loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world, and he journeyed up the river, till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers, and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and when he was bending over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water painted his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then, for a time, he looked up and shook his fist at her. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw from far tops the misty mountains, out from which the stream came, and he thought suddenly, it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun could not watch me there. The roots of the mountains must be roots indeed, and there must be great secrets buried there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So he journeyed by night up to the highlands, and he found a little cave out from which the dark stream ran, and he wormed his way like a maggot into the heart of the hills, and banished of all knowledge. The ring went into the shadows with him, and even the Maker, when his power had begun to grow again, could learn nothing of it. Okay, give me 1 second. I am going to grab my charger. I forgot to grab my charger. My phone's about to die. I realized that the model was frozen because my phone was about to die. I'm so sorry. Okay, we continue. Gollum, cried Frodo. Gollum? Do you mean that is how this very Gollum creature that Bilbo met? How loathsome. I think it is a sad story, said the wizard, and it might have happened to others, even to some hobbits that I have known. I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion. It is true all the same, replied Gandalf, about their origins at any rate. I know more than hobbits do themselves, and even in Bilbo's story suggests a kinship. There is a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one remarkably well, and very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf or an orc or even an elf. Think of the riddles they both knew, for one thing. Yes, said Frodo, though other folks besides hobbits ask riddles much of the same sort, and hobbits don't cheat. Gollum meant to cheat all the time. He was just trying to put poor Bilbo off his guard, and dare I say it amused his wickedness to start a game which might end in providing him with an easy victim. But if he lost, would not hurt him. Only too true, I fear, said Gandalf, but there was something else in it, I think, which you don't see yet. Even Gollum was not wholly ruined. He proved tougher than even one of the wise would have guessed, as a hobbit might. There was a little corner of his mind that was still his own, and light came through it, as though a chink in the dark, out of the light out of the past. It was actually pleasant, I think, to hear a kindly voice again, bring up memories of winds and trees, and sun on the grass, and such forgotten things. But that, of course, would only make the evil part of him angrier in the end, unless it could be conquered. Unless it could be cured, Gandalf sighed. Alas, there is little hope for that of him, yet not no hope. No, not though he possessed the rings for so long, almost as far back as he can remember, for it was long since he had worn it, much. In the black darkness it was seldom needed. Certainly he had never faded. He is thin and tough still, but the thing was eating up his mind, and of course the torment had become almost unbearable. All the great secrets under the mountains had turned out to just be empty. There was nothing more to find out, nothing worth doing, only nasty, furtive eating and resentful remembering. He was altogether wretched. He hated the dark, and he hated light more. He hated everything, and the ring most of all. "What do you mean?" said Frodo. "Surely the ring was as precious and the only thing he cared for. But if he hated it, why didn't he get rid of it, or go away and leave it?" "You ought to begin to understand, Frodo, after all you have heard," said Gandalf. "He hated it and loved it, as he hated and loved himself. He could not get rid of it. He had no will left in the matter." "A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing it on to someone else's care, and that only in the early stage, when it first begins to grip. But as far as Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. He needed my help too, and even so, he would never have just forsaken it or cast it aside. But it was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him." "What? Just in time to meet Bilbo?" said Frodo. "Wouldn't an orc have suited better?" "It is no laughing matter," said Gandalf. "Not for you. It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time, and putting his hand on it blindly in the dark. There is more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was trying to get back to its master, yet it slipped from Isildur's hand and betrayed him. When a chance came, it caught poor Deagle, and he was murdered, and after Gollum, it had devoured him. It could make no further use of him, so he was too small and mean, and as long as it stayed with him, he would never leave his deep pool again. So now, when his master is awake once more and sending him out his dark thought from Mirkwood, it abandoned Gollum, only to be picked up by the most unlikely person imaginable, Bilbo from the Shire. Behind that, there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ringmaker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker, in which case you were also meant to have it, and that may be an encouraging thought." "It is not," said Frodo, "though I'm not sure I understand you. But how have you learned about this ring, and about Gollum? Do you really know it all, or are you just guessing still?" Gandalf looked at Frodo, and his eyes glinted. "I knew much, and I have learned much," he answered, "but I'm not going to give an account of all my doings to you. The history of Elendil and Isildur and the One Ring is known to all the wise. Your ring is shown to be that One Ring by the fire writing alone, apart from any other evidence." "When did you discover that?" asked Frodo, interrupting. "Just now in this room, of course," answered the wizard sharply, "but I expect to find it, and I have come back from the dark journeys and long search to make the final test. It is the last proof, and all is now only too clear. Making out Gollum's part and fitting it into the gap of history required some thought. I must have started with guesses about Gollum, but I am not guessing now. I know. I have seen him." "You have seen Gollum?" exclaimed Frodo in amazement. "Yes. The obvious thing to do, of course, if one could. I tried long ago, and I have managed it at last." "Then what happened after Bilbo escaped from him? Do you know that?" "Not so clearly. What I have told you is what Gollum was willing to tell. though of course not in any way I've reported it. Gollum is a liar, and you have to sift his words. For instance, he called the ring his birthday present, and he stuck to that. He said it came from his grandmother, who had lots of beautiful things of that kind. A ridiculous story. I have no doubt that Smeagol's grandmother was a matriarch, a great person in her way, but to talk of her possessing many elven rings was absurd, and as for giving them away, it was a lie, but a lie with a grain of truth. The murder of Deagol haunted Gollum, and he had made up a defense, repeating it to his precious over and over again as he gnawed bones in the dark, until he almost believed it. It was his birthday. Deagol ought to give him the ring. It had previously turned up just as so to be a present. It was his birthday, present, and so on and so on. I endured him as long as I could, but the truth was desperately important, and in the end I had to be harsh. I put the fear of fire on him, and wrung the true story out of him, bit by bit, together with much sniveling and snarling. He thought he was misunderstood and ill-used, but when he had last told me his history as far as the end of the riddle game and Bilbo's escape, he would not say any more, except in dark hints. Some other fear was on him greater than mine. He muttered that he was going to get his own back. People would see if he would stand being kicked and driven into a hole and then robbed. Gollum had good friends now. Good friends and very strong. They would help him. Baggins would pay for it. That was his chief thought. He hated Bilbo and cursed his name. What is more, he knew where he came from. But how did he find out? Asked Frodo. Well, as for the name, Bilbo very foolishly told Gollum himself, and after it would not be difficult to discover his country, once Gollum came out. Oh yes, he came out. His longing for the ring proved stronger than his fear of orcs, or even the light. After a year or two, he left the mountains. You see, though still bound by the desire of it, the ring was no longer devouring him. He began to revive a little. He felt old, terribly old, yet less timid. He was mortally hungry. Light of sun and moon, he still feared and hated, and he always will, I think, but he was cunning. He found he could hide from daylight and moonshine and still make his way swiftly and softly by the dead of the night with his pale, cold eyes, and catch small, frightened or unwary things. He grew stronger and bolder with new food and new air. He found his way into Mirkwood, as one would expect. Is that where you found him? Asked Frodo. I saw him there, answered Gandalf. Before that, he had wandered far, following Bilbo's trail. It was difficult to learn anything from him for certain, for his talk was consistently interrupted with curses or threats. He had gotten it in his pockets, he said. It wouldn't say, "No, precious, little cheat. Not a fair question. It cheated first, it did. It broke the rules. We ought to have squeezed it. Yes, precious. And we will, precious." That is a sample of his talk. I don't suppose you want any more. I had weary days of it, but hints dropped from among the snarls. I even gathered that his padding feet had taken him at least to Esgaroth, and to the streets of Dale, listening secretly and peering. Well, the news of the great events went far and wide in the Wilderland, and many had heard Bilbo's name and knew where he came from. We had no secret of our return journey to his home in the west. Gollum's sharp ears would soon learn what he wanted. Then why didn't he track Bilbo further? Asked Frodo. Why didn't he come to the Shire? Ah, said Gandalf. Now we come to it. I think Gollum tried to. He set out and came back westward as far as the Great River, but then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I'm sure. No, something else drew him away. So my friends think, those that hunted him for me. The Wood Elves tracked him first, as an easy task for them, for his trail was still fresh. Through the Mirkwood and back again it led them, though they never caught him. The wood was full of rumor of him, dreadful tales of even among beasts and birds. The woodmen said that there were some new terror abroad, a ghost that drank blood. It climbed trees to find nests, it crept into holes to find young, it slipped through the windows to find cradles. But at the edge of the Mirkwood Trail turned away, it wandered off southward and passed out to the Wood Elves' ken, and was lost. Then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, and not the first, though I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go, for I had much to think of that time, and trusted the lore of Saruman. Well, that was years ago. I have paid it for since, with many dark and dangerous days. The trail was long cold when I took it up again, after Bilbo left here, and my search would have been in vain, but for the help that I had from a friend, Aragorn, the greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world. Together, we sought for Gollum down the whole length of the Wilderland, without hope and without success. But at last, when I had given up the chase and turned to other parts, Gollum was found. My friend returned at the great perils, bringing the miserable creature with him. What he had been doing, he would not say. He only wept and called us cruel, with many a Gollum in his throat when he was pressed. He whined and cringed, and rubbed his long hands, licking his fingers as if they pained him, as if he remembered some old torture. But I am afraid there is no possible doubt. He was made his slow, sneaking away step by step, mile by mile, south, to the last of the land of Mordor. The heavy silence fell in the room. Frodo could hear his heart beating. Even outside, everything seemed still. No sound of Sam Shears could be heard. Yes, to Mordor, said Gandalf. Alas, Mordor draws all the wicked, and the dark power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave him open to the summons, and all folk were whispering then the news. And all the folk were whispering then of the new shadow in the south, and its hatred of the west. There were his fine new friends, who would help him in his revenge. Wretched fool. In that land he would learn much, too much for his comfort, and sooner or later, as he lurked and pried on the borders, he would be caught and taken for examination. That was the way of it, I fear. When he was found, he had already been there long, and was on his way back, on some errand of mischief. But it does not matter much now. His worst mischief was done. Yes, alas, through him the enemy was learned that the one had been found again. He knows where Isildur fell. He knows where Gollum found his ring. He knows that it had a great ring, for it gave him long life. He knows that it is not one of the three, for they have never been lost, and they endure no evil. He knows it is not one of the 7 or the 9, for they are accounted for. He knows that it is the one. And he has at last heard, I think, of the hobbits and the Shire. The Shire. He may be seeking for it now, if it is not already found where it lies. Indeed, Frodo, I fear he may even think that the long unnoticed name of Baggins have come important. But this is terrible, cried Frodo. Far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. O Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance. Pity. It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to be strike without needed. He had been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil, and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. I am sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum. You have not seen him, Gandalf broke in. No. And I do not want to, said Frodo. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now at any rate he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to him, then? Can you give it to them? Then do not be eager to deal it out in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it. And he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. When that time comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. Yours, not at least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The wood elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts. All the same, said Frodo, even if Bilbo could not kill Gollum, I wish he had not kept the ring. I wish he had never found it, and that I had not got it. Why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it? Let you? Make you? Said the wizard. Haven't you been listening to all that I have said? You are not thinking of what you are saying, but as far as for throwing it away, it was obviously wrong. These rings have a way of being found in evil hands and might have done great evil. Worst of all, it might have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Indeed, it certainly would, for this is the one, and he is exerting all his power to find it or draw it to himself. Of course, my dear Frodo, it was dangerous for you. That had troubled me deeply. But there was so much at stake. I had to take some risk. Though, even when I was far away, there has never been a day when the Shire had not been guarded by watchful eyes. As long as you never used it, I did not think that the ring would ever have lasting effects on you. Not for evil, not at any rate for a long time. And you must remember that 9 years ago when I saw you, I still knew little for certain. But why not destroy it, as you say you should have done long ago, when Frodo cried again. If you had warned me, or even sent me a message, I would have done away with it. Would you? How would you do that? Have you ever tried? No, but I suppose one hammer could it, or melt it. Try, said Gandalf. Try now. Frodo drew the ring out of his pocket again and looked at it. It now appeared plain and smooth, without mark or device that he could see. The gold looked fair and pure, and Frodo thought how rich and beautiful was its color, how perfect was its roundness. It was an admirable thing, and altogether precious. When he took it out, he had intended to fling it from him into the very hottest part of the fire, but he found now that he could not do so. Not without great struggle. He weighed the ring in his hand, hesitating and forcing himself to remember all that Gandalf had told him. And then, with an effort of will, he made a movement, as if to cast it away, but he found that he had put it back in his pocket. Gandalf laughed grimly. You see, already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, nor will to damage it, and I could not make you, except by force, which would break your mind. And as for breaking the ring, force is useless. Even if you took it and struck it with a heavy sledgehammer, it would make no dent in it. It cannot be unmade by your hands or by mine. Your small fire, of course, would not melt it, even ordinary gold. This ring has already passed through it unscathed and unheated. But there is no smith's forge in this shire that could change it all. Not even the anvils and furnaces of the dwarves could do that. It has been said that dragon fire could melt it and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on this earth in which the old fire is hot enough, nor was there ever any dragon, not even an Ankalong the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for it was made by Sauron himself. There is only one way: to find the cracks of doom in the depths of the Orodruin, the Fire Mountain, and cast the ring there, if you really wish to destroy it, to put it beyond the grasp of the enemy forever. I do really wish to destroy it, cried Frodo, or, well, have to it destroyed. I'm not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, for not power or wisdom at any rate, but you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have. But I have so little of any of those things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring? No, cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. With that power, I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain power still greater and more deadly. His eyes flashed and his face was lit by a fire within. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity. Pity for the weakness, and the desire to strength is too good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me. He went to the window and drew aside the curtains and the shutters. Sunlight streamed back in again into the room. Sam passed along the path, was whistling. And now, said the wizard, turning back to Frodo, the decision lies with you, but I will always help you. He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder. I will help you bear this burden, as long as it is yours to bear. But we must do something soon. The enemy is moving. There was a long silence. Gandalf sat down again and puffed his pipe as if lost in thought. His eyes seemed closed, but under his lids he was watching Frodo intently. Frodo gazed fixedly at the red embers of the hearth until they filled all his vision, and he seemed to be looking down into profound wells of fire. He was thinking of the fabled cracks of doom and the terror of the fiery mountain. Well, said Gandalf at last, what are you thinking about? Have you decided what to do? No, answered Frodo, coming back to himself out of the darkness and finding to his surprise that it was not dark, that out of the window he could see sunlit garden. Or perhaps, yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me. Whatever it may do, it will be slow to evil, if you keep it with that purpose, said Gandalf. I hope so, said Frodo, but I hope that you might find some other better keeper soon. But in the meanwhile, it seems that I am in danger, and in danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Bag End, leave the Shire, leave everything and go away, he sighed. I should like to save the Shire, if I could, though there have been times where I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, have felt an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of it going away, but I imagined that as of kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile. A flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me. And I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small, and very uprooted, and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible. He did not tell to Gandalf, but as he was speaking, a great desire to follow Bilbo flamed up in his heart, to follow Bilbo, and even perhaps to find him again. It was so strong that it overcame his fear. He could almost have run out of there and then down the road without his hat, as Bilbo would have done on a similar morning long ago. My dear Frodo, exclaimed Gandalf. Hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a mouth, and yet after 100 years they can still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you. But Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought of how important it would prove. I am afraid you are right. The ring will not be able to stay hidden in the Shire much longer, and for your own sake, as well as for others, you will have to go, and leave the name of Baggins behind you. That name will not be safe to have outside the Shire or in the wild. I will give you a traveling name now. When you go as Mr. Underhill. But I do not think you need to go alone. Not if you know of anyone you can trust, anyone who will be willing to go by your side, and that you would be willing to take into unknown perils. But if you look for a companion, be careful in choosing, and be careful of what you say, even to your closest friends. The enemy has many spies and many ways of hearing. Suddenly he stopped as if listening. Frodo became aware that it was all very quiet, inside and outside. Gandalf crept to one side of the window, and with a dart he sprang to the sill and thrust a long arm out and downwards. Then there was a squawk, and up came Sam Gamgee, curly head hauled by one ear. Well, well, bless my beard, said Gandalf. Sam Gamgee, is it? Now what may you be doing? Lor bless you, Mr. Gandalf, sir, said Sam. Nothing. Leastways, I was trimming in the grass border under the window, if you follow me. He picked up the shears and exhibited them as evidence. I don't, said Gandalf grimly. It is some time since I last heard the sound of your shears. How long have you been eavesdropping? Eavesdropping, sir? I don't follow you. Begging your pardon. There ain't no eaves at Bag End, and that's a fact. Don't be a fool. What have you heard, and why did you listen? Gandalf's eyes flashed, and his brows stuck out like bristles. Mr. Frodo, sir, cried Sam, quaking. Don't let him hurt me, sir. Don't let him turn me into anything unnatural. My old dad would take on so. I meant no harm, on my honor, sir. He won't hurt you, said Frodo, hardly able to keep from laughing, although he was himself startled and rather puzzled. He knows, as well as I do, that you meant no harm, but just up and answer his question straight away. Well, sir, said Sam, dithering a little, I heard a deal that I didn't rightly understand about an enemy and rings and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons and a fiery mountain and elves, sir. I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort. I believe them too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, sir, I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see elves, sir, when you go? Suddenly, Gandalf laughed. Come inside, he shouted, and putting out both of his arms, he lifted the astonished Sam, shears, grass clippings and all, right through the window, and stood him on the floor. Take you to see elves, eh? He said, eyeing Sam closely, but with a smile flickering on his face. So you heard that Mr. Frodo was going away? I did, sir, and that's why I choked, which you heard seemingly. I tried not to, sir, but it bursted out of me. I was so upset. It can't be helped, Sam, said Frodo sadly. He had suddenly realized that flying from the Shire would be more painful parting than merely saying farewell to the familiar comforts of Bag End. I shall have to go, but... And he looked hard at Sam. If you really care about me, you will keep the dead secret. See? If you don't, even if you breathe a word of what you've heard here, then I hope Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes. Sam fell on his knees, trembling. Get up, Sam, said Gandalf. I have thought of something better then. Something to shut your mouth and punish you properly for listening. You shall go away with Mr. Frodo. Me, sir, cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk. Me go and see elves and all? Hooray! He shouted, and then burst into tears. Chapter 3. 3 is company. You ought to go quietly, and you ought to go soon, said Gandalf. 2 or 3 weeks had passed, and still Frodo made no sign of getting ready to go. I know, but it is difficult to do both, he objected. If I just vanish like Bilbo, the tale will be all over the Shire in no time. Of course you mustn't vanish, said Gandalf. That wouldn't do at all. I said soon, not instantly. If you can think of any way of slipping out of the Shire without it being generally known, it will be worth a little delay. But you must not delay too long. What about the autumn, on or after our birthday? Asked Frodo. I think I could probably make some arrangements by then. To tell the truth, he was very reluctant to start, now that it had come to the point. Bag End seemed more desirable residence than it had for years, and he wanted to savor as much as he could of his last summer in the Shire. When autumn came, he knew that the part of the journey at least his heart would think more kindly of journeying, as it always did that season. He had indeed privately made up his mind to leave on his 50th birthday, Bilbo's 128th. It seemed somehow that proper day on which to set out and follow him. Following Bilbo was upmost in his mind, and the one thing that made the thought of leaving bearable. He thought as little as possible about the ring, and where it might lead him in the end. But he did not tell all his thoughts to Gandalf. What that wizard guessed was always difficult to tell. He looked at Frodo and smiled. "Very well," he said. "I think that will do. But it must not be any later. I am getting very anxious. In the meanwhile, do take care, and don't let out any hint of where you are going. And see that Sam Gamgee does not talk. If he does, I shall really turn him into a toad." "As for where I am going," said Frodo, "it would be difficult to give that away, for I have no clear idea myself yet." "Don't be absurd," said Gandalf. "I am not warning you leaving an address at the post office, but you are leaving the Shire, and that should not be known until you are far away. And you must go, or at least set out, either north, south, west, or east, and the direction should certainly not be known. I have been so taken up with the thoughts of leaving Bag End and of saying farewell that I have never even considered the direction," said Frodo. "For where am I to go, and by what I shall steer? What is to be my quest? Bilbo went on to find a treasure, there and back again, but I go to lose one and not return, as far as I can see." "But you cannot see very far," said Gandalf. "Neither can I. It may be your task to find the cracks of doom, but that quest may be for others. I do not know. At any rate, you are not ready for that long road yet." "No, indeed," said Frodo, "but in the meantime, what course am I to take?" "Towards danger, but not too rashly nor too straight," answered the wizard. "If you want my advice, make for Rivendell. That journey should not prove too perilous, though the road is less easy than it was, and it will grow worse as the years fails." "Rivendell," said Frodo. "Very good. I will go east, and I will make for Rivendell. I will take Sam to visit the elves. He will be delighted." He spoke lightly, but his heart was moved suddenly with a desire to see the house of Elrond Half-Elven, and breathe the air of the deep valley where many of the fair folk still dwelt in peace. One summer's evening, an astonishing piece of news reached the Ivy Bush and the Green Dragon. Giants and other portents of the borders of the Shire were forgotten for more important matters. Mr. Frodo was selling Bag End. Indeed, he had already sold it to the Sackville Bagginses. "For a nice bit too, and some, at a bargain price," said others, "and that's more likely when Miss Lobella, the buyer, Otho had died some years before at the ripe but disappointed age of 102. Just why Mr. Frodo was selling his beautiful hole was even more debatable than the price. A few, the theory, supported by the nods and hints of Mr. Baggins himself, that Frodo's money was running out. He was to leave Hobbiton and live on a quiet way on the proceeds of the sale down in Buckland among his Brandybuck relations. As far as the Sackville Bagginsons may be, some added, but so firmly fixed by the notion of the immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End, and become that most found his hard to believe, harder than any other reason or unreason that their fancy could suggest. To most it suggested a dark yet unrevealed plot by Gandalf. Though he kept it to himself, very quiet, and did not go by a day, it was well known that he was hiding up in Bag End. But, however, a removal might fit within the designs of his wizardry, there was no doubt about the fact. Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland. "Yes, I shall be moving out this autumn," he said. "Mary Brandybuck is looking out for a nice little hole for me, or perhaps a small house.
As a matter of fact, with Mary's help, he had already chosen and bought a little house at Crick Hollow in the country beyond Bucklebury. To all but Sam, he pretended he was going to settle down there permanently. The decision was set out eastwards, had suggested the idea for him, for Buckland was on the eastern border of the Shire, and he had lived there in childhood, and his going back would be at least seem credible. Gandalf stayed in the Shire for over 2 months. Then, one evening, at the end of June, soon after Frodo's plan had been finally arranged, he suddenly announced that he was going off next morning. "Only for a short while, I hope," he said, "but I am going down beyond the southern borders to get some news if I can. I have been idle longer than I should." He spoke lightly, but it seemed to Frodo he was looking rather worried. "Has anything happened?" he asked. "Well, no, but I've heard something that has made me anxious and needs looking into. If I think it necessary, after all, for you to get off at once, I shall come back immediately, or at least send word. In the meanwhile, stick to your plan, but be more careful than ever, especially of the ring. Let me impress you on it once more. Don't use it." He went off at dawn. "I may be back any day," he said. "At the very latest, I shall come back to the farewell party. I think, after all, you may need my company on the road." At first, Frodo was a good deal disturbed and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard, but his uneasiness wore off. In the fine weather, he forgot his troubles for a while. The Shire had seldom seen so far a summer, or so rich an autumn. The trees were laden with apples, honey was dripping in the combs, and the corn was tall and full. Autumn was well underway before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew near, and he still did not come or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay and help him with the packing. There was Fredgar Bolger and Falco Boffin. And, of course, his special friends Pippin Took and Merry Brandybuck. Between them, they turned the whole place upside down. On September 20th, 2 covered carts went off laden to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home, by the way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day, Frodo became really anxious, and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still, Gandalf did not appear. In the evening, Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers, but he was troubled and felt in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful, in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, but the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Sackville Bagginses. "Whatever happens to the rest of my stuff, when SBs get to their claws on it, at any rate, I have found a good home for this," said Frodo, as he drained his glass. It was the last drop of Old Wynyards. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday, and they drank his health and Frodo's together, according to Frodo's custom. When they went out for a sniff of air and a glimpse of the stars, and then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of luggage. Merry took charge of this, and drove off with Fatty. That's Fredgar Bolger. "Someone must get there and warm the house before you arrive," said Merry. "Well, see you later. The day after tomorrow, if you don't get to sleep on the way." Folko went home after lunch, but Pippin remained behind. Frodo was restless and anxious, listening in vain on the sound of Gandalf. He decided to wait until nightfall. After that, if Gandalf wanted him urgently, he would go to Cricket Hollow, and might then get there first, for Frodo was going on foot. His plan for pleasure and a last look at the Shire, as much as any other reason, was to walk from Hobbiton to Buckleberry Ferry and take it fairly easy. I shall get myself into a bit training too, he said, looking at himself in a dusty mirror in a half-empty hall. He had not done any strenuous walking for a long time, and the reflection looked rather flabby, he thought. After lunch, the Sackville Bagginses, Lobelia, and her sandy-haired son, Lotho, turned up much to Frodo's annoyance. "Ours at last," said Lobelia, as she stepped inside. It was not polite, nor strictly true, for the sale of Bag End did not take effect until midnight, but Lobelia can perhaps be forgiven. She had been obliged to wait about 77 years longer for Bag End than she had once hoped, and she was now 100 years older. Anyway, she had come off to see that nothing she had paid for had been carried off, and she wanted the keys. It took a long while to satisfy her, as she had bought a complete inventory with her, and went right through it. In the end, she departed with Lotho and the spare key, and promised that the other key would be left at the Gamgees in Bagshaw Row. She snorted and showed plainly that she thought the Gamgees capable of plundering the whole during the night. Frodo did not offer her any tea. He took his own tea with Pippin and Sam Gamgee in the kitchen. He had been officially announced that Sam was coming to Buckland to do for Mr. Frodo and look after his bit garden, an arrangement he was approved by the gaffer, though it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobella as a neighbor. "Our last meal at Bag End," said Frodo, pushing back his chair. They left washing up for Lobelia. Pippin and Sam strapped their 3 packs and piled them in the porch. Pippin went out for a last stroll in the garden. Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed as sad and gloomy and disheveled. Frodo wandered around the familiar rooms and saw the light out of the sunset fade on the walls and the shadows creep out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked around the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way down Hill Road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding through the dusk. The sky was clear, and the stars were growing bright. It was going to be a fine night, he said out loud. That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start, and Gandalf must follow me. He turned to go back and then stopped, for he heard voices just around the corner at the end of Bagshot Row. For once, one voice was certainly old Gaffer's. The other was strange and somehow unpleasant. He could not make much of what it said, but he heard Gaffer answers, which were rather shrill. The old man seemed put out. "No, Mr. Baggins hadn't gone away. He went this morning, and my friend Sam went him. Anyway, all his stuff went. Yes, sold out and gone, I tell ye. Why? Why's none of my business, or yours. Where's to? That ain't no secret. He moved to Buckleberry, or some such place, away down yonder." "Yes, it is. A tidy way. I've never been so far there. They're queer folks in Buckland. No, I cannot give no message. Good night to you." Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that he did not come up on the hill seemed a great relief. "I'm sick of his questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose," he thought. What an inquisitive lot they all are. He had half a mind to go and ask Gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better, or worse of it, and turned and walked away quickly to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door. "Sam," he called. "Sam, time." "Coming, sir," came the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself, wiping his mouth. He had been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar. "All aboard, Sam," said Frodo. "Yes, sir. I'll last for a bit now, sir." Frodo shut and locked the round door and gave the key to Sam. "Run down with this to your home, Sam," he said. "Then cut along the row and meet us as quick as you can at the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We are not going through the village tonight. Too many ears pricking and eyes prying." Sam ran off at full speed. "Well, now we're off at last," said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked around the corner to the west side of Bag End. "Goodbye," said Frodo, looking at the dark, blank windows. He waved his hand and then turned and followed. Bilbo, as if he had known it, hurried after Pennygrin down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to fields, passing into the darkness like a rustle in grasses. At the bottom of the hill on its western side, they came to the gate opening to the narrow lane. As they halted and adjusted their straps of their packs, presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put his head on a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he had called a hat. In the gloom, he looked very much like a dwarf. "I am sure you have given me all the heaviest stuff," said Frodo. "I pity snails, and all that they carry their homes in their backs. I could take a lot more yet, sir. My pack is quite light," said Sam, stoutly and untruthfully. "No, you don't, Sam," said Pippin. "It is good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel weight less when he walked off some of its own." "Be kind to the poor old hobbit," laughed Frodo. "I shall be as thin as a wattled wand, I'm sure, before I get to Buckland. But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you have taken more than just your share, Sam, and I shall look into it at our next packing." He picked up his stick again. "Well, we all like walking in the dark," he said, "so let us put some miles behind us before bed." For a short way they followed the lane westwards, then leaving it, they turned left and took quietly to the fields again. They went in single file along the hedgerows and the borders of coppices. The night fell dark about them. Their dark cloaks, they were invisible as if they had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits, and they were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the fields and the woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time, they crossed the water, west of Hobbiton, by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning alder trees. A mile or two further south, they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tookland, and bent southeastwards, and made for the Green Hill country. As they began to climb the first slopes, they took back and saw the lamps of Hobbiton far off twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its grey pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell. "I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again," he said quietly. When they had walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool, and starry, but smoke-like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the streams and deep meadows. The thin-clad birches, swaying in the light wind above their heads, made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper for hobbits, and then went on again. Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading gray into the darkness ahead, to the road of Woodhall and Stock and Buckleberry Ferry. They climbed away from the main road and the water valley and wound over the skirts of the green hills towards Woody End, a wild corner of the East Farthing. After a while, they plunged into a deeply coven track between the tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked or hummed in a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. They had marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last they began to climb a steep slope. He stopped and yawned. "I am so sleepy," he said, "that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It's nearly midnight." "I thought you liked a walking in the dark," said Frodo, "but there is no great hurry. Mary expected us some time the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at first likely spot." "The wind's in the west," said Sam. "If we get to the other side of this hill, we'll find a spot that is sheltered and snug enough, sir." There is dry fir wood just ahead, if I remember rightly. Sam knew that the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill, they came on a patch of fir wood. Leaving the road, they went to the deep, resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flames and the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while until they began to nod. Then, each in an angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came looking at them when their fire had died away. A fox passing through the wood on business of his own stopped several minutes and sniffed. Hobbits, he thought, and well, what next? I have heard of strange doings in these lands, but I have seldom heard of a hobbit sleeping outdoors under a tree. 3 of them. There's something mighty queer about this. He was quite right, but he never found out any more about it. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back, and that his neck was stiff. Walking for pleasure. Why didn't I try it, he thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition. And all my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Saxful Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good, he stretched. Wake up, hobbits, he cried. It is a beautiful morning. What's beautiful about it? Pippin said, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got bath water hot? Sam jumped, looking rather bleary. No, sir, I haven't, sir, he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward, the sun was rising red out of the mist that lay thick on the world. Touched with gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootlessly in a shadowy sea. A little below him to the left, the road ran down steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had gotten a good fire going. Water! Shouted Pippin. Where's the water? I don't keep water in my pockets, said Frodo. We thought you had gone to find some, said Pippin, busy setting out the food and cups. You had better go now. You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles and the small camping kettle a little fall where the water fell, and a few feet over the outcrop of grey stone. It was an icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it divided under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear had already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them, they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that had melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end towards the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. The road goes on forever, said Pippin, but I can't without a rest. It is high time for lunch. He sat down on the bank at the side of the road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river. At the end of the Shire, in which he had spent all of his life, Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across the land he had never seen to a new horizon. Do elves live in these woods? He asked. Not that I have ever heard, said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He was too gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. He suddenly spoke out loud, as if to himself, saying slowly, The road goes on ever and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errand meet. And whither then? I cannot say. This sounds a bit like of old Bilbo's rhyming, said Pippin. Or is it one of your imitations? Does that sound like altogether encouraging? I do not know, said Frodo. It came to me then as if it was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years, before he went away. He used often to say that there was only one road. It was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path it was a tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, he used to say. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and if you let it, might take you to the Lonely Mountain, or even further, into worse places? He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he had been out for a long walk. Well, the road won't sweep me away anywhere for an hour at least, said Pippin, unslinging his pack, and the others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road, after they had a good lunch and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of the afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far, they had not met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic to Woody End. There had been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road, much winding, lay straight through the grassland, sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of approaching woods. I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind, said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. I wonder if that's Gandalf coming after us, said Frodo. But even as he said it, he had a feeling it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. It may not matter much, he said apologetically, but would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I am sick of my doings to being noticed and discussed, and if it is Gandalf, he added, as if an afterthought, we can give him a little surprise to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight. The other two quickly ran to the left and down a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hooves drew nearer. Just in time, he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great roots. Round the corner came a black horse. No hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and sat on it was a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a black cloak and hood, so that his boots in the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quiet with his head bowed as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire of it to get it out of his pocket came so strong that he began to slowly move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought. As his hand touched the chain on which it hung, at that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled onto the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. Well, I call that very queer and indeed disturbing, said Frodo to himself, as he was walking towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behavior. I can't say why, but I felt certain that he was looking, or smelling, for me. I also felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before. But what has one of the big people to do with us, said Pippin, and what is he doing in this part of the world? There are some men about, said Frodo. Down in the South Farthing, they have trouble with big people, I believe, but I've never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from. Begging your pardon, put Sam in suddenly, I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this black rider comes, unless there's more than one, and I know where he's going to. What do you mean? Said Frodo, sharply, looking at him in astonishment. Why didn't you speak up before? I have only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, "Hello, Sam," he says. "I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for, Mr. Baggins of Bad End. And he's only just gone. I sent him on to Buckleberry. Not that I like the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out, and when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his older home for good, he hissed at me, he did. He gave me quite a shudder. What sort of fellow he was, says I to the gaffer. I don't know, says he, but he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckoned it was one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny. I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer is getting old and more than a bit blind. It must have been near dark when this fellow had come up the hill, and found him taking the air at the end of our row. I hope he hadn't done no harm, sir, nor me. The gaffer can't be blamed anyway, said Frodo. As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to the stranger, who seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went on and asked him who it was. I wish I had, or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road. Still, there may be no connection between the rider and the gaffer's stranger, said Pippin. We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have been following us. What about the smelling, sir, said Sam, and the gaffer said he was a black chap. I wish I had waited for Gandalf, Frodo muttered, but perhaps it would only have made matters worse. Then you know or guess something about this rider, said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words. I do not know, or I would rather not guess, said Frodo. All right, Cousin Frodo, you can keep your secret for the present if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what we are to do? I would like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we had better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders and invisible noses has unsettled me. Yes, I think we will move on now, said Frodo, but not in the road, in case the rider comes back or another follows him. We ought to do a good step more today. Buckland is still miles away. The shadow of the trees were long and thin on the grass as they started off again. Now they kept a stone throws to the left of the road, and kept him out of sight as much as they could. But this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and the evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point, it bent left and went down into the lowlands of Yale, making it for Stock. But a lane branched right, winding through a wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodhall. That is the way for us, said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came to a huge hulk tree. It was alive and had leaves on small branches that had been put out round on broken stumps of long fallen limbs. But it was hollow and could be entered by a great crack on the side way from the road. The hobbits crept inside, and they sat there upon the floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them, and they crept back into the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently and steadily into the dusk. A star came out above the trees into the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in step to keep their spirits. After a time, the stars grew thicker and brighter. The feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of hooves. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a long supper song, or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words to a tune that it was as old as hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventure. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary our feet are still round the corner we may weet. A sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone, the tree, flower, and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate. Though we shall pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take them hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and sloe, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, farewell you well, farewell you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, there are many paths to tread, those shadows to the edge of the night, until the stars are all alight. Then the world behind me and home ahead will wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp, and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. This is the part where we are going to stop with a nice, beautiful little song about going to bed. We are quite a bit of ways into chapter 3, and I think we're gonna leave it for next time. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all are relaxed. I hope you all had a good time listening. I do apologize for my stuttering and lack of being able to read sometimes. My throat's so dry. I did not want to stop reading suddenly to just like drink water, so I do apologize. I wanted to say hello, Jordan. Yes, this is Lord of the Rings. We're reading through the Fellowship of the Ring. Wanted to say hello, Ruby. Good stopping place. It really is. It really is. You enjoyed it? That's good. Hello, Thickish Dread. Just got over a cold and this is perfect to fall asleep to. Thank you. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. This is a really good stopping point. We are just shy of 90 pages into our book. And think about it. Technically, it's not a lot of pages, but boy, oh boy, did it take up the time. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for being here, listening to me read like this. I hope you all had a wonderful time. Please make sure that you get some rest. You all are now sleepy, eepy. It would be great to just fall asleep. You almost fell asleep. Ah, I should have kept going. I should have kept reading. I'm so sorry. But I'm gonna end stream here, as I would also like to rest. Please everyone take care. I will see you all tomorrow.